Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
You know, I'm usually pretty wary anytime I hear somebody say, the truth is. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a great believer in what I call radical honesty, but is that the same thing as the truth? And in all honesty, pun intended, do we want to know the truth, or do we just want confirmation that we are right? You know, I've been doing this show for over 4 years, and my goal is to bring what is known about marriage and how to make yours successful to anyone who's interested. Question is it making a difference? I don't have any idea. But I do know that people keep getting married. And I also know that there is good information out there on what marriage is and what it isn't, about what behaviors that will improve it and behaviors that will damage it, and what makes it work and what breaks it. So I'm going to keep doing the show and having guests on to share the same information in various ways and hope that at least one episode will land for you. So on that note, I'm really pleased to welcome clinical psychologist and author Dr. Forrest Talley as my guest to talk about the 5 truths about marriage. So Dr. Talley, Forrest, thank you so much for being on the show and talking about, you know, these things that people just don't want to believe.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
You know, because I was really struck by your analysis about how the truths about marriage were revealed to you in your practice, by scientific research, and this one I love, by what your grandparents inherently knew and accepted. You know, it's like, we know it's true, and then when science proves it, it's like, yes.
Yeah, exactly right.
So that said, let's take the first truth, which, and I as a spouse, I don't want to believe this. Your spouse is not perfect, because of course I'm perfect. Or to hear my mother-in-law tell it, my husband is perfect, which it's like, okay, that's why he got punished as a child. But let's not go there. So,
yeah,
why should this idea that our spouse is not perfect be surprising?
Well, you know, I think if you were to ask nearly any married person that question, you know, is their spouse, whether their spouse is perfect, you know, obviously not. Should they expect their spouse to be perfect? They're going to say, no, of course not. But the interesting thing is then when you watch a lot of married couples and you see how they interact and how they behave towards one another, you see that they often show so little grace for one another.
Oh, is that not the truth? Yeah.
Yeah, and for the small imperfections, I'm not saying this on high as though, yeah, I've got it figured out. You know, a lot of these things I was talking to myself when I wrote this article. But it's that there's no mistake, no gaffe, misstep that is easily just passed over and let go. And so it's how we act towards them. If we could show that grace and remind ourselves, no, they're not perfect, things would sure go a lot smoother.
Well, and I love this because one of the things I talk with my clients about is, can you give your partner the benefit of the doubt, which is a kind of a form of grace, that, okay, they did something that maybe you didn't like, maybe that was hurtful, you know, maybe was just clueless, and can we give them the benefit of, oh, they're a good person. They wouldn't normally do something like this. I mean, I tell people, I know my partner, my husband, would never purposely hurt me, so if I'm hurt and it's coming from him, there's something he doesn't know. And, you know,
yeah,
so
that's a great point.
Instead of getting mad, you know, then I just go, oh, let me go talk to him about this. Let me go explain why what he's doing isn't working for me right now. You know, it's that grace.
No, that's it. And because you give your husband that grace, it develops a different perspective about your husband that just makes the relationship a lot easier, and things flow a lot more smoothly, and it's more enjoyable. Whereas if we end up not letting things go by and we criticize frequently, it develops that mental framework, that mental negative perspective, where we start to look for ways in which our spouse is hurting us, and then no good comes of that.
Right. We tell ourselves the story that they did this on purpose, that if, and then of course this goes into what I call the mind reading school of marriage, that if they loved me, they would know that that wasn't okay. And it's like, oh, please, don't go there.
Right, exactly.
But this idea, and I have a little bit of a problem just with the concept of unconditional love, because I'm not sure that it exists, but everybody wants. We all want to be loved unconditionally. But then the question becomes, am I willing to love unconditionally? Am I willing to love my partner despite the fact that they keep leaving their dirty socks on the floor, or they don't call me when they're going to be late, or whatever the thing is that annoys me about them.
Right. No, I think you've hit it right on the head there, and so you pretty much you get back what you give often, and if you don't, then there's other problems in the marriage.
Right.
But typically you've got to be willing to give that extra grace in order to receive it as well.
Exactly. So now your second truth is an interesting one, and one that makes me crazy when I hear this. Not the truth, but the flip side of the truth, because your second truth is that your spouse cannot make your life complete. And I have been going after this truth ever since the ridiculous idea appeared in the movie The Color of Money that, oh, you complete me. It's like, oh, my gosh, please don't do that. So what makes this truth, your spouse cannot make your life complete, what makes that a truth?
I've got to say, common sense and decades of observation.
Yes.
When you think about it, think about all the needs any adult has, which, I mean, off the top of your head, you'd say, well, I guess it's to be affirmed as a valuable husband or wife, or affirmed as being capable or as being attractive, to be understood and to be loved, to be admired, to share your interests with somebody, share your passions, at the same time to be challenged and comforted. To be, I mean, the list just goes on and on.
Right.
We can't complete our spouse, and they can't complete us. And if we enter marriage or are living in marriage where we're expecting that is a huge burden to put on your spouse, and they inevitably will disappoint you.
Right. And a lot of times people go in because they're looking for the person who's going to fill the hole that was left in their childhood. And, and that's not going to happen. I mean, I see that all the time. And now what I tell people is, I'm responsible for, taking care of myself, and my partner can add or detract to that. They can make it easier or harder. But they can't. I mean, it's the whole thing. Happiness is an inside job. I can't look to my husband to make everything okay. And, and I think that this is where, we have the romantic, the prince is going to come and slay all my dragons, and we're going to ride off into the sunset. And then, of course, that's where the story ends. Nobody checks in 10 years later to find out how Prince and Cinderella are doing. It's an unrealistic expectation, but this is what all the romance, this is all the rom-coms, and, this is what we're told from, the princess stories. At least, thank God, Disney's, getting to where some of the princesses can actually take care of themselves.
Right. But I agree with you. I think it's a falsehood that's been perpetrated, and people are more than willing to accept. But honestly, it goes back to, I think, what you were saying a minute ago, which is you have to take responsibility for yourself. Your happiness is up to you. Now, your spouse hopefully adds to that. Your spouse hopefully is fully committed to you and loves you dearly, but the thought that they're going to complete you, that is not going to happen. And then you ask yourself, you reflect on it, you say, why would anybody complete me? What does that even mean to complete me?
It means there's a part of me missing, right? I mean, well, it's this, and it goes along with the concept of the soulmate. That there's a perfect person out there that when we meet, all my problems and challenges will go away and life will be completely smooth sailing. And so if I'm having a problem with my partner, then they're obviously not my soulmate, and the relationship needs to end. And I'm like going, okay. It's like, stop with the soulmate and the complete me. It's like, yes, we want to find people who are compatible with us, who make our lives, I like to think about it as my husband makes me want to be my best self.
Now that's a great quality. Absolutely. And I remember speaking with a man once he was saying that about his wife. He said, that is what I want most, is somebody who makes me want to be the best and helps to inspire me and motivate me to be the best that I can be.
Right. And one of my most favorite quotes is that marriage is our last best chance to grow up, because it really is. It really is about, here's this other person who I love and I care about, who's not necessarily purposely challenging me, but is challenging me, and it's challenging me to how do I want to respond, just as we were talking about in the my spouse not being perfect, is how do I want to respond to the imperfections? How do I want to respond to the differences that this person is presenting?
See, isn't that interesting? Because really, I think part of what you're pointing out is the exact reverse of what people are saying when they're saying, I want somebody to complete me. Because often when I speak with those folks, the underlying message is I want somebody who will accept me entirely, thoroughly, unconditionally, and not really make any demands on me that are too challenging. Whereas the sort of spouse that you're talking about is one who says, I thoroughly, completely love you, and I think you can be a better person.
Right.
Well, and that's the mature, in my view, that's the sort of mature way of approaching a marriage.
Right.
Is the acceptance that, we're not perfect, obviously. No one is perfect, far from it. We're all broken in some way.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
we want a spouse who loves us in our brokenness, but also says, hey, you can do better.
Right.
I see the potential in you.
Yeah, encourages us to heal and be past it. And I think that's really one of my problems with this whole complete me thing, is that that's my job. I have to come to the relationship as whole as any of us ever are, because it's a journey and it's a constant, and I've had clients who we've done one thing and then they'll come back a couple of years later. I go, we're back at that same thing. And it's like, well, wait a minute. And I said, no, it's just a different layer of it. It's a constant, what do I want to do with this information that this person who I love is bringing up for me? And, yes, I'm not going to say it's fun all the time, but it's what makes us become more thoughtful, I think, more complete people. But that's because somebody is holding up the mirror going, I'm not sure I like what I look like. Let's see what I can do about that.
I think you, once again, have hit it right on the head. That's what it is. And so no one's going to complete you in that way. They're going to, what they're going to do is they're going to provoke you and inspire you to take the next step to become more complete.
Right.
But no one can do that work for you.
Yeah, unfortunately. This is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm talking the truths about marriage with author and psychologist Dr. Forrest Talley. And if you're wanting to have a good marriage and searching for ways to get it, fantastic. Having the knowledge is one thing. Putting it into practice, though, is another. And if you're ready to do that, I encourage you to consider getting a guide for this journey. So give me a call or send me an email to schedule your free, no obligation, Create Your Happily Ever After transformation session. You can reach me at area code 919-924-0463. Again, that's 919-924-0463. Or you can send me an email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. Now, moving on to the next couple of truths, because I like to put these two, I think, really go together. So I'm going to combine truth 3, which is you get out of your marriage what you put into it, and truth 4, marriage is like an investment account, because I think they're kind of related. So what makes these two truths?
Yeah, they are related. I should have talked to you before I published it. I would have just combined them.
I don't know. I kind of like 5 truths.
Yeah.
It's a nice number.
Well, it is what it is now. But it's. I think it was back in a way to what we were talking about a second ago, and that is that everyone is a package, and they have their strengths and weaknesses. The parts that are really healthy, and the parts that are maybe a little bit rough or broken. And those rough parts are going to take a toll on a relationship.
Yep.
And you need a cushion in order for that toll not to be too severe and really diminish the quality of a marriage. And the cushion is provided by what you put into it, by the thoughtful acts, by the sacrificial acts, by the generosity, the love that you show, etc. And so that's what I was referring to there, is that it's like an investment account in the sense that the more you put into it, the more that cushion of goodwill, that storehouse of goodwill grows, so that during the downtimes when you've messed up and you've forgotten an anniversary, or you've responded with anger or a harsh comment, there's something to draw upon without going emotionally bankrupt.
Right, and this is so critical, because I talk to my clients. It's like I say, aim for hitting it out of the park 80 to 85% of the time, because then you get that 10 to 15% cushion, or 15 to 20% cushion when you mess up, because we're gonna mess up.
Exactly.
There's no way. I mean, I once had a client who, when I asked her what her goals were for working with me, she said, "Well, I want my husband to never hurt me again." And I said, "Intentionally or unintentionally?" Because yes, we can get him to stop hurting you intentionally, but he's going to unintentionally hurt you. That's just because he can't know everything about you. And so that's, so when he does, he needs to have that cushion. So, oh, ow, that was an owie. Yeah, that hurts. But my partner knows that I love her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those everyday things that we do. And I don't know, these big grand gestures that are, the big marriage proposals that are all over the internet, and everything has to be done in these big overdone ways. And it's actually the small, everyday little kindnesses that really make that cushion, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That's what it is. And the more you can do that, and the more it can be tailored to what is meaningful to your spouse, then you've really hit the jackpot.
Well, and that's the critical thing, what is important to your spouse. And I think I'm sure you're familiar with the 5 love languages, which I think is a somewhat a simplistic idea. I like it as kind of a nice introduction, because it kind of is like, oh, you don't experience love the same way I do. This doesn't matter to you in the way that it matters to me. I mean, my husband is so funny because, he hates the wintertime because my feet turn into little ice cubes. or so do my hands, and I'll put them on him. And he says to me, he says, if I did that to you, you'd really be upset. And I said, yes, but it doesn't bother you, and I know it doesn't bother you. But when you do it to me, it does. But it's like it's like knowing those things. It's like, well, what is it that matters to my partner? And this is when I think we can lose a lot of things, because it's like, well, why does my partner care if I leave my socks on the floor? It's no big deal. I pick them up every week and do the laundry. It's like, okay, but it bothers your partner, and that's kind of like a little withdrawal from the investment account.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point. And I like, for instance, what Gottman talks about with regard to developing love maps with regard to your partner, and that is finding out what's really important to them. And then once you find that out, you're so much better able to make these investments. I was speaking to a couple just the other day, and I'd given each of them a little questionnaire asking about, who's your spouse's best friend, what's your spouse most worried about right now, and other questions, just to get them to start thinking a little more deeply about understanding one another. And the husband looked at this questionnaire, and he tossed it back on the table. He says, I can tell you right now, I can't answer a single one of those questions. I have no clue.
Wow.
And his wife was looking at him, shocked. And I'm thinking, Houston, we have a problem.
But here's on some level, at least he recognized that. Now, if the question is he willing to do something about it? But and I think that's one of the big challenges, is because I don't know how to find out. I just remember years ago. Oh, my mother, I love her to death, but oh my gosh, thank goodness I was behind her when she said this, because my face was just, she said that she didn't think that women should have to ask for what they want. And I'm like going, oh my gosh, how's that working for you, Mom? How are our partners supposed to know if we don't tell them?
Right. Exactly. Everybody needs to ask to make sure that it's clear. And like you're saying, with regard to this guy, the good news is he expressed a desire to get to know that. But I think it's easy for a lot of couples just to assume, well, I know what makes my partner tick and what's important to him. Maybe not.
Well, and I always tell my clients, I said, we use ourselves as a template that, if I like this, or if I would do it this way, then my partner would be the same. We need to check that out. Because it may, and that's really kind of why I like the 5 love languages, because it's like a nice, easy introduction into that. It's like, yeah.
Yeah. So, exactly. Yeah, I like that. I like that template, that framework that they've developed as well. Even though, as you say, it is a little simplistic, but it's very helpful.
Right, and it gets people thinking. Just like your questionnaire gets people thinking about. Well, I don't know what is the biggest thing on my partner's mind right now. Now, the last truth that you have is an interesting one. Love is a verb, not a noun. And I think I know what you mean by this, but it's but it's kind of used as a verb in I love you. But I think you're talking about more the actions that support that. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Actually, as I came to that last point. One of the things that kept running through my mind was much of the work that I've been doing over the last 20 years, instead of with married couples, has been with children who have been abused and neglected. And you run into a lot of these little kids who have been horribly abused, and they'll say, yeah, but my mom or my dad, they love me. And, what they don't realize is, obviously, is that it's easy to say that, but love has to be consistent with behavior. And it's so easy just to apply that to marriage. And I'm not talking about abusive behavior in marriage. I'm just saying,
sure.
So often you'll hear couples where it's, I love you, I love you, I love you. But that has to be translated in some way into the day-to-day behavior that shows that you love them, that they are taking a priority in your life. And it goes back to the last thing we just talked about, which is actually finding out what makes your spouse tick and what's meaningful. Mm-hmm. Or it can go back to the first thing we talked about, which is I'm going to show grace and let things go. Mm-hmm. Or it could go back to the second thing we talked about, which is investing in the relationship and, really, really putting yourself out and sacrificing for them. But there has to be action. It can't just be, hey, I love you.
Right, and it has to be consistent. I mean, and I think that's one of the things. It's like, words are easy. And I remember once I had a client who was telling me, what he said to me was, my marriage is important, but, and then he was going to tell me about, his work, blah, blah, blah. I said, stop right there, because now you're going to tell me that what you just said isn't true.
Yeah, that's great.
And he looked at me like, I said, because, and I think this is one of the things, and I don't think people do it on purpose. I think that what happens is that other things, I call it the squeaky wheel, that other things suddenly become more urgent, the project at work, or the baby that was just born and is requiring a lot of time, and all of these things. It's like just it's like piling on until the foundation, which is the marriage, just breaks under the weight of all these other things. Where if people were actually putting some more emphasis onto their marriage, onto their spouse, onto this relationship, which actually really needs to hold, is really what's going to hold everything else up. But I don't have time to do this, and it's like, okay, it's one of those things, the old adage of you don't have time to do it right, but you have time to do it over.
Right. Well, what you're saying, makes me think maybe the principle could be rephrased that love is not so much a noun as it is a verb that gets expressed in priorities. Mm-hmm. Because this is part of what you're saying, is that the tyranny of the present, that always we focus our attention on, this needs to be done, this, mm-hmm. Will often cause us to lose sight of the priority of the person that we're married to. And so love really should show up mm-hmm. from time to time with that person being shown the priority, even with all these small urgencies popping up day after day.
Well, and and there's I always talk about a fine line between feeling safe and secure in my marriage and taking it for granted that it's always just going to be there.
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction. Because they fight against one another, huh? When you're mm-hmm. feeling safe and secure, it's easy to take it for granted. That's why you need to be intentional, I think. Mm-hmm. And I've heard of people who develop rituals, which is part of being intentional, mm-hmm. that help they and their spouse to connect every day, whether it's having coffee at the end of the day together or whatever it might be, but being very intentional about connecting so that you don't take things for granted.
Mm-hmm. And and be aware that things, and obviously, emergencies happen, things come up, but I think that establishing, like you said, these rituals, these things that we do all the time, and I think it was Pat Love and Steve, I can't think of what his last, Steve Stosny wrote a book a while back, and they were talking about the four important times of a day: when you first see each other in the morning, when you leave each other in the morning, when you first come back at the end of the day, and then right before you go to sleep. Those are critical times in a relationship to do something, to mm-hmm. acknowledge your partner, to and. Yeah. So I think that and again, it's about being intentional. It's about, I think that's why those of us in the profession are always going, date night,
Yeah, no, that's right. But it's having some sort of benchmarks or that you are triggered to think, oh yeah, I need to pay attention to my spouse. Mm-hmm. I've heard, and I've done this with some couples I've worked with, where I just say, I want you once a month to get together, set aside half an hour at the most, and talk to one another. Each of you take so much time, and you tell one another where things are going really well, where you're really pleased, where you saw the effort and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then spend another 10, 15 minutes where, and you got to say this without getting bitter or highly critical, but where you would love to see the person start to apply some effort in the marriage. And that too helps people not take it for granted.
Sure. I mean, because it's, I have a friend, she runs a business, and every year, she sits down and they do, they look through the business and what's working, what's not working. It's like, we got to do that with our relationships too. It's like, what's working, what's not working, not waiting until, the straw that breaks the camel's back, and then we're in a knockdown, drag out fight. But I think, like you say, doing it on a regular basis where we're just kind of checking in, and so that we can, head off trouble, or because a lot of times people will put in effort and they don't know whether it's landing. And so it's like, mm-hmm. Oh, no, I really appreciate that, you've made this effort to do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, oh, good, somebody's noticed, and it's what I should be doing, because we don't want people going down, putting in all kinds of energy and effort into something that isn't going to work with their partner.
Exactly. Yeah, you need to check. You need to check in. Otherwise, you have no idea whether what you're doing is right. It's kind of like I remember my father used to. One year he got a nutcracker for a Christmas decoration, and then all of his kids thought, "Oh, Dad really loves nutcrackers," and started collecting them. And I remember it was about 10 years later. I said, "Dad, you've got more nutcrackers around this house." And he said, "Yeah, I don't even like them, but I don't have the heart to tell anybody."
Right, it's just the assumption.
Right, and it's similar in marriage. If you don't get the feedback to say, "Hey, what you're doing, appreciate the effort, but it's not really what I'm looking for," then you're going to miss out. Because the more you hit the target, like you say, the more you swing for the fences and you hit that, the better the relationship and the richer your experience.
Well, okay, so we've just solved all of the marital problems in the world in half an hour.
I'm going to give you credit for that, yeah.
So can you please tell people where they can read more about what you do and how they can find out more about all the wonderful information you've gathered over the years?
Well, sure. If they want to go to my website, then they can find out all that information. It's forresttalley.com. That's FORRESTTALLEY.com. And like I say, there's blogs there and some other information.
Terrific. So, people fall in love and decide to get married with all kinds of hopes and expectations. They believe the hype that love is all you need, and it's a great place to start, but it isn't going to be enough. So embracing the truths and developing productive behaviors that align with those truths is what's going to bring you success. And hopefully you find this show interesting enough to keep coming back. And until next week, stay loving.